even though your pictures look great. Oh no, I'm being recorded. So if you guys want to turn on your cameras and if you guys just want to have a friendly chat with me, I think that might be more engaging for all of us. If you want me to just do all of the talking, I have a lot of content, man. Uh, I can do that. So, any takers? No? Okay.
Okay,
Well, then I'll
so
just
yeah.
yeah.
Let's take a quick vote. If you guys want to do a Q&A session, an interactive one, drop a message in the chat, right? We can do a Q&A session. If
Yeah.
not, then honestly, I have a lot of questions. I could just ask all the questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Mr. Saif, trading stability for impact, making the leap into startups, right? So let's start with the basics. Personally, for example, I have been working in early stage startups for the very minimum career I have. I've been only in the work in my career for 2 years now, right? And the startups are tricky, and startups there is some risks associated with startups, right? Let's start with the basics, and there you can go on from there, right? One question then I then have is for people who have a journalism skill set working in early stage startups. How do they go about making their mark or ensuring that at least because they have a very journalist skill set that is not applicable everywhere, and then they are working in early stage startups. Um, how do they go about developing their skill set, and how do they go about ensuring that they are successful in this field?
Right. And so, I mean, obviously, early stage startups will favor generalists, and it makes sense that if that's all that your experience has been, then you will only be a generalist. And I mean, my take on this is that that generalists will ultimately perform better over the course of a career than specialists will in today's day and age. And of course, I'm obviously very biased as a generalist, and I think I'm doing fairly okay. So I do think that it makes more sense that in a world that is as interconnected and as globalized as ours, you want to be able to add value across various, typical job descriptions, right? But having said that, any generalist needs to specialize in some area or the other, right? And if you don't, then you're going to struggle. So the earlier you are in your career, the more tricky this becomes. Because, for example, if you take your own example, where you've spent a couple of years in early stage companies, it sort of becomes this double-edged sword where you are acquiring a lot of great experience and you are developing a skill set, but because you're only developing a generalist skill set, you're going to find it very difficult to progress further in your career, right? Because unless you're happy only ever working in early stage companies, right? You need to pick one niche that you find more interesting than others and go and find some depth within that, right? So the argument is depth versus breadth. And generally, the point that I make is that achieve some level of depth in one particular discipline, but also cover that with breadth in various other fields. And you can achieve that within an early stage company as well, right? So even though you may be wearing multiple hats, you can choose to spend 60, 70, 80% of your time in any one core function, whether that's product or growth or marketing or finance or whatever tickles your pickle, right? And you take that forward where you decide that, okay, I'm going to be a finance specialist, but I'm also going to generalize in product and growth, right? So that I can also add some value in those areas. And that will be my USP because not a lot of finance guys understand growth as well, or not a lot of finance guys understand product as well. Or same goes if you want to do vice versa. You can be a product guy that understands finance. That's also a great skill to have. So that's what I would say to that, right? I hope that answers your question.
Yeah,
Anybody else?
definitely.
Anybody else have any questions, or are we gonna continue taking his? Well, I guess you're in the hot seat, my guy.
Okay. Okay, so no, I don't mind. I honestly don't mind. Okay, so let's start with okay. So also if Before that I kind of start this, I will be asking questions from my point of view, which is a guy earlier in career trying to build a career in early stage startup or in a startup with a journalist skill set, right?
Yeah.
People who have progressed in their careers, if they have any questions, specifically any questions regarding startup or business strategy or communication for them, they are free to question as well, right? Okay, so let's see.
People are just
One,
shy, man. It's okay. Go ahead.
yeah. Okay, so so this is my journal observation, right? I Early stage startups are hard to work at and fun to work at, right? In the sense that there is a lot of work to do. There is not a lot of room in terms of, especially if it's pre-seed or if it's bootstrapping, right? If And then again, there's a lot of responsibility, right? For example, I specialize in growth, so my every month we will sit, and almost all startups I've worked at, every month we will sit, and the only question for me would be, what are numbers saying? Are they growing, right? For people who are just stepping into their careers, right? This can be a nervous situation, right? So before stepping into this role, what sort of a mindset should we have? I believe, working in early stage startups or startup in general, a mindset, a growth and exponential mindset kind of plays a very long way, right? A, what should we expect in journal out of it? I am going and early stage startup hired me, right? Now my exposure has been of MNCs and companies, right? What should I expect in terms of what the work culture would be, in terms of what the workload would be, in terms of what responsibilities would be fulfilling?
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. So I mean that was the topic of the talk, I think, right? So I have a lot of thoughts on that. So um my view on this is that people that are early in their career should opt for startups over large corporations or established companies, because startups will allow for a more organic environment for self-discovery and learning, right? So the kind of experience you described where you get to play with a generalist skill set is because an early stage company creates that environment by necessity where it's all hands on deck. And even if Rahim was hired to be a coder, he also may be contributing to product management directly. He also may be contributing to growth directly, whatever have you, right? Wherever his skill set, or wherever, wherever there's a fit, right? And wherever he's also willing to contribute, right? And when you're early in your career, you're just graduating with a particular trade, perhaps not even that, and you're thrown into one function, but the startup will allow you to explore other areas more openly than any other company would, right? If you were to go and work for an MNC, you're a cog in a very, very large machine. You are a brick in a very big wall, right? And that structure is very regimented. It is very, the lines are very clearly drawn. So if you're hired as a management trainee, you're just going to go through the rotations that have already been decided for you. Or if you're hired as a marketing assistant, or whatever it is, that is the only department you get to work in. That is the only department you have direct access to. Maybe you'll collaborate with sales, maybe you'll collaborate with media, but even those collaborations are limited, right? And the kind of behavior that I enjoy, where I want to poke into every other area of business, ask a lot of questions, understand how it works. That kind of thing is generally discouraged in large corporations, right? It's a different kind of culture.
Yeah.
So, so if you're early in your career, there's a couple of things you enjoy that I don't, right? Or maybe Mustafa, who may be my age, does not, right? Where that is that early in your career, you have the luxury to take risks. Most of you are, privileged enough where you don't have to actually earn money the moment you graduate, right? Whatever you're earning is
True.
like your own pocket money or you're saving it. And there's no expectation, there's no obligation onto you where you have to, run your household or look after a family or anything like that. So The risk equation is very much in your favor. You can opt for, early stage startups where cash compensation might be terrible, but the potential upside on equity is really high. You get that culture, that environment that allows you to explore everything you may be even remotely or tangentially interested in, right? So like, I'll give you an example of somebody who graduated with an econ degree, and all they know right now is that they're good with numbers, but they feel like they may enjoy writing content, or they feel like they may enjoy doing sales and interacting with new people on a daily basis. And the only way to figure that out, the only way to get a good answer to that in the shortest amount of time possible is to be in that startup, right? Which will allow you to explore all of those fronts and then come out of it on the other end with a clear picture of who you are and who you want to be, right? I'm surrounded by people my age or older who have been working in large corporations since the beginning of their career. And, they just did it. They just landed into it. Whatever was offered to them, they just stuck with it. Supply chain, okay, I guess that's me now. And did 10 years, 15 years in supply chain. And now they're at that point where the midlife crisis is about to begin, right? Now they're at that point where they feel disillusioned with their career choice because they're like, well, I always really enjoyed doing this and I never really got to try it. Or I always really enjoyed sales and I never got to explore that. Or I always liked the idea of brand management, but I never even got to try it. So on and so forth, right? And these stories are all around you. So to avoid becoming that statistic is why I advise young professionals to opt for opportunities in startups, because you'll get to learn a lot more, you'll get to play around a lot more, and that environment is a lot more organic and free form, right? An MNC or a large corporation is the exact opposite of free form. Now, what happens if you do work in a corporation for a couple of years and then maybe try to come into a startup? That actually is a lot more difficult. It's easier. I think it's easier to go the other way around, right? Because if you start with startups, if you begin with startups and then you want to opt into moving into a corporation, those aren't going anywhere, right? The large corporations definitely aren't going anywhere. They'll still be there 5 years from now. So if you try to go that route, I think it's easier because, like I said, you'll have a clear picture of who you are, what your skill set is, who you want to be, right? So when you're opting for that, let's say large FMCG or whatever it is, you know that you belong in supply chain or you know that you belong in ops, and you're going to go in and operate at a much higher efficiency with a much much better like vigor and rigor as well because of how you've been used to working in startups, right? And I think you'll do well, right? You might have some trouble integrating into the culture, but you'll do well. If you're going the other way, where you've been working in corporations and then you try to come into startups, then I think it's a wholly different ball game, and that is much more difficult because the pace at which corporations move is maybe 1/10 of the pace that a startup would typically move. Jesus Christ, that's a lot of questions. Um, and right, and so coming from a slow pace and trying to catch up to a startup pace is a very difficult thing. And keep in mind, the
Yeah.
older you get, the more difficult it is to adapt and adjust, right? So if you're 29, you're 30 years old, you're coming into a startup world for the first time in your life. It's very difficult to teach an old dog new tricks, and it's very difficult for you to unlearn the way you've been taught
Yes.
to approach work, the way you've been taught to approach, cross-functional collaboration, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many things, right? And that is effectively all of these things boil down to culture. The kind of culture that you've been that has been inculcated in your mind in the corporate world does not fly in the startup world. So when your mind is the most flexible, the most malleable, right, is when you are the youngest, right? So go into a startup, extract all the good, all the value from that experience. And then if you ever do want to go and work in corporates, and maybe you will, right? Like, and none of us, I mean, even me, I don't intend to work in any company that I work for longer than 2 years, right? Times have changed. So the same goes for you. If you're working for a startup today, no one expects you to be there until the IPO or until the exit 5 years later, right? Get your experience, learn what you're good at, move on to the next startup or the next corporate. But this is basically the perspective or the picture that I'm painting, where self-discovery is really important. You don't want to be that 30,
Yep.
35-year-old when where you still don't really know who you are. It took me 9 years, 10 years to realize where I belong, where my skill set really fits, and which area of business I really want to contribute to. And of course, that's tech, right? And I know that now. I only know that because I only got the opportunity, or I only made the choice to work for a startup 9 years into my career. And now I'm struggling right now. I mean, it creates a whole new set of problems for me where I spent 9 years in the wrong industry. Sure, I learned a lot, I grew a lot, but now I'm 31. I'm at a certain seniority level in my career, but and I know that I want to stay in tech, but I only have two co-founders from my previous startup and one GP from my previous startup who are in my corner and who will go to bat for me and say that this guy gets shit done, right? This is why I'm trying to consult and do advisory now, because the way I think about it is, okay, if I want to continue down this route, how do I get the highest number of founders and GPs in my corner in the shortest amount of time possible? You know, I do projects, right? I do short-term engagements where a founder will say, yeah, he was attached with us for only 2 months, but we gave him a problem and he knocked it out of the park. So the earlier you realize this stuff in your career, the better it is, where you have a clear picture of, you know what, startup is not for me. I did it for a year, I did it for 2 years. I don't see the value there. I'm a corporate professional. I belong in the P&Gs of the world. Fantastic, right? But the whole point is that take the unconventional route early in your career, because P&G is not going anywhere. All right, should I go on to these questions? I have 10 years
Yeah.
of experience in the IT industry, 7 years of large scale, 3 years with startups. Why should one take a leap? I think I already covered that. Is it always worth, is it always worth working for startups compared to, I think I already covered that too. I mean, so the difference is startup, more organic working environment where you're able to explore a variety of functions, a variety of skill sets, and you're able to work at a much faster pace. You're expected to work at a much faster pace. So you really find out what you're also capable of, right? And what MNCs and large corporations provide is insane levels of structure. You often have so many levels of seniority above you, people you can learn from. In startups, more often than not, a lot of the learning is self-directed. Keep that in mind as well. This is very important, right? So, of course, you're working for a founder, but a founder does not know every area of business always, right? Usually.
Yeah.
So maybe you're working as a dev in a startup, and maybe you don't, if you're an early stage company, you usually do not have a CTO, right? Maybe you have a couple of senior devs that are maybe 3-4 years ahead of you, but you're not really getting that like level of mentorship that you would in a structured, massive services company, software services company. So that is another, trade-off depending on how you look at it, right? I prefer self-directed learning. I know that I can seek out mentors from industry on my own. If you're not that kind of guy, then maybe, the corporate environment will suit you better, where, people are there to hold your hand and create that career path for you and guide you along it, right? The environments and cultural difference, I think I covered that too. I mean, the culture is completely antithetical on both ends, right? It is two opposite ends of the spectrum, where a startup will usually always be more people led. The expectation of pace is a lot more different. The expectation of cross-functional collaboration and all hands on deck is a lot more different. Whereas in large companies, it's a lot more political, right? Because again, there's a lot more at stake, right? There's bigger money, there's bigger budgets, bigger roles, way bigger career ladders, right? And so naturally that human beings are political by nature, never forget, right? But it's about which environment, either brings out the best in you or the worst in you, right? And large corporations will often bring out the worst in people because you're often competing for bigger and bigger roles. And again, if you look at these large MNCs, that's where everyone wants to be. So the level of competition there is insane as it is. So even if you make it in, it's not like you've won and you can relax, right? The competition kind of really only gets worse. And as you progress further up the ladder, the competition gets worse. So, because again, there are fewer and fewer positions up the ladder, right? So the moment you hit manager, you're competing with a smaller pool. The moment you hit director, you're competing with an even smaller pool, et cetera, et cetera. So, those are the pros and cons, right? I mean, it really depends on the kind of environment that you enjoy, that you feel you will flourish in. Competition, again, some people prefer that. Risk assessment. A father of two leaping into startup. I again, I don't know how to answer that. It really depends on what your personal financial situation is. You haven't given me that data. It also depends on the startup you're leaping into, whether it's an early stage company that's barely funded, or whether it's a Series C company. I don't know what exactly you mean. So, I can send you a post on how to have a conversation like along the lines of you evaluating the startup's financial health, and the right questions to ask to get those data points out, and then you can make a decision accordingly. It is always a leap of faith, because founders may not always portray the harsh reality of where they stand. So you have to collect data from various sources. You have to do your market research. You have to really find out how much, what kind of traction that company has, what kind of funding that company has, the quality of the investors that they have. All these things make a huge difference. So I would still say that the risk is worthwhile, but it always depends. I mean, it wouldn't be worthwhile if it's a crappy startup, right? What if the startup falls flat on its face? Will the job market accept me afterwards? Yes, absolutely. It's really about, so people, I think, take this the wrong way. So, and this is also, by the way, tied to everything else I said previously, where if you do not have faith in your ability to execute, and this is not for young professionals, like young professionals don't know where they stand either way, right? But even then, even for them, if you don't have faith in your own individual ability to execute, do not go to a startup. Okay, go to a corporation where you can sort of hide amongst the other bricks in the wall and get by that way, and just rely on a measly increment year on year, and maybe you'll be good enough for a promotion, maybe you won't, but you know that you'll have job security, right? Well, you can do just enough to coast by, and you probably won't get fired. That the same is not true for startups. All right. So first, let's be clear. The burden on individual performance is very high. Okay. Now, this question, what if the startup shuts down? It actually shouldn't affect you, as long as you know that you're good at your work and you handled your shit perfectly. Okay. Because at the end of it, what you're discussing with the next interviewer is what you achieved in that company, right? With whatever tools you were given, whatever team you had, whatever market reality you were dealing with. If you were a growth manager, what targets did you achieve? If you were an FP&A guy, what cost improvements did you drive in the P&L? If you were a dev, how many features did you ship? How did you improve delivery? How did you improve sprints? Whatever it is, right? So that is what matters. And there's a lot of companies locally in Pakistan that have failed, and most of the people that were good were employed within days of those companies shutting down, because again, they had a large body of work to display, and they were able to make that argument about why they were good, even if the company wasn't, right? Also, just because a startup fails doesn't mean the company. It's not a reflection on the company. It's not a reflection on the team or the culture or the founder. Startups failing is just part of the game, right? And that's the game you sign up for, right? So again, that is part of the risk equation. So know what you are signing up for. But again, if you don't have it in you, if you don't have faith in your own individual capacity, just don't do it, man. Equity versus hefty compensation up front. Most startups do not offer hefty cash compensations up front. If they are, that is probably a red flag. Okay. So this again depends on your own financial situation, which I'm not privy to. This depends on your own risk appetite, which I'm not privy to. I know a lot of people that I work with who would negotiate their cash down and ask for more equity. One of the most sort of apt examples for this is Junaid Iqbal, who was the MD for Kareem in Pakistan, because he was hired before Kareem was acquired, and he was offered. I think he took, it would have been like 25% of the cash that he was offered initially, something like that, 25-30% of the number. So like if he was offered 1 million rupees, he took 300,000 rupees. He's like, I'll take 300,000 rupees cash monthly, but the equity offer that you have given me needs to be increased by 5x, right? And that's because he came from private equity. He understood the value of ESOPs, and he was willing to take that bet on himself, right? He was in a senior position driving the entire Pakistan business, owning the entire Pakistan P&L, and he was willing to take that bet that I'm going to make this business I'm going to get it to that point where it will have an exit, right? And sure enough, he did, right? And then he cashed out like $10 million or some absurd amount, right? But he was able to cash out $10 million because of the amount of equity he took on so early into the company. So that is a personal decision, right? Also understand, like, you need to do your research on ESOPs. Okay, what a lot of people don't understand is dilution of ESOPs. So ESOP is employee stock options. Most startups will offer some form of employee stock options. If a startup is not, that is also a red flag. That is not a startup. Okay. The point of working for a startup is that you get stock options and you own a piece of the company. Otherwise, you would just go and do a normal job. All right. Why would you go through the shit of wearing 20 different hats and working crazy hours and giving your life to a company? Because you're building it together. You're building it together and it will have a massive exit, and that's ultimate wealth creation for everybody involved. We're all doing it for money. Let's be clear, right? Impact and all that is secondary. We're all doing it for money. So the thing about employee stock options is, like all equity on the cap table, it dilutes with every funding round, right? So you can do some research on this. You'll find a million articles on, where you actually stand when a company is going through an exit, right? So today you think you own 1%, and maybe you do own 1% today, but 4 years from now, when that company is having its acquisition, you will end up getting 0.001%. Now, you have 1% today of a company that's valued at $10 million. And 4 years from now, you're getting 0.0001% of a company that is then valued at $1 billion. So actually, your payout is a lot higher, but you need to be aware before you get into it. That's all I'm saying. Do your research, right? So, okay, $1 million question. At this point, should I start my own startup mindset of saving and learning first and then opting for it or plunging into it? Right. So you said you worked in a startup. So if you have worked in a startup and you have understood that paradigm from founders that have been building a hyper growth company, and it was venture or it was bootstrapped or whatever it was, you understand what it takes, then yeah, go for it. I mean, again, I can't tell you, I don't know who you are, where you stand, how much money you have, your ability to raise, your ability to build a team, the concept you have, the problem you want to solve. There's so much that goes into it. It is purely a personal decision. Nobody can advise you whether or not. I mean, maybe I could advise you if I had all of those data points, and that would take like an hour with just you. So I'm going to skip that one. All right. Choosing startup signals in unstable paths with those around us. Yes. Personally, I quit my corporate job, decided to pursue my own consulting business, and I think that was harder on my old-fashioned brown parents. Any thoughts on how young or mid-career people can deal with getting family buy-in? Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to help you with this, right? I mean, I'm kind of living my life solo, and again, not by choice. I'm far away from my family, so I really think it's about creating a narrative on how important it is to your future and to your personal livelihood, which is so much more than just a paycheck, right? And again, like I said earlier, that we're all doing it for money, but impact and culture, all of these things play a major role within that, right? So even when I was coming to the startup, I remember I was discussing it with my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, that I'm doing this. These are the pros and cons, and the way I put it forward to her as well was that I'm really tired of being treated like shit in this advertising and media world, and I have an idea. I think that I will be treated better here. This may probably be the only place within Pakistan where I'll be treated like a human being. And I don't know what the work will turn out to be. I don't know how financially lucrative this will be, but that is one thing I can bet on, right? And I know the founder. I know that he's a good guy, right? He's my age. I want to be able to work with a management team that's my age. I want to be treated like an equal. And that was something that really resonated with her, where she understood my personal decision-making matrix on how it was more about me prioritizing my mental health and also prioritizing this idea that everything I was saying earlier about experimentation, because even in advertising, I was always working for SITs. These were family-owned businesses, right? You don't get to have ideas. You don't get to take your own direction. You do what you're told. And I wanted to experiment. I wanted to build something. I wanted to try and see what I'm worth, what I'm capable of. So it was both of these things combined that really helped her come to my side as well and say that you should do this, and even if it doesn't work out, you can always come back to advertising because you have a body of work there. Hi, Seth. That would work. what would work? That would work. What would office? I don't know what you're talking about. When you look at engaging with a startup, do you recommend basing that startup on one's past experiences? Or would you not sure what that means when you're looking at engaging with a startup. I think what you're asking is, so like if I come from advertising, should I only ever go and work for an ad tech and not work for a blockchain company? Is that what you mean? If that is what you mean, let me answer that this way. So you do not need to have a deep understanding of the technology that the company is building. All right. So that is something that's why we hire tech teams, and that's why we have CTOs and all these people, right? What is critical to understand is what is the problem that is being solved? My laptop's going to die. Hold on. My apologies. What is critical to understand is what problem is that startup addressing or solving, right? So, for example, if it is leveraging blockchain to enable smart contracts in health, right, and create more visibility on the entire value chain in healthcare and helping doctors and medical institutions and patients achieve more accountability and blah, blah, blah. I'm just making shit up, right? So if you care about that problem, you're like, yeah, health is a real problem and that value chain is broken and we could do with more visibility. And that's something that resonates with me, right? That I can understand that problem. I can see the value in that problem. And I would like to work on that problem because ideally, if you're a non-technical individual, you're probably working on growth or marketing or finance or supply or partnerships or something like that, right? So that would also only work on a day-to-day basis if you care about that problem, if you can see yourself becoming invested in that problem, right? And then, of course, you evaluate the culture of the company, the mindset of the founders, the background of the founders, the financial health of the company, the financial offer that's been made to you, of course, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think it has to align, right? So I had never worked in e-commerce or B2B e-commerce. Of course, it didn't exist prior to like 2019 in Pakistan. But I took that plunge into that sort of company, and even until the very end, even during it and until the very end, I always said this publicly as well, that I never gave a shit about B2B e-commerce ever. Even in the beginning, I didn't care, and all the way until the end, I didn't care. I cared about the fact that when I met these boys, I realized that they were some of the smartest people I had ever met, and I fell in love with the team, and that was enough for me. Again, these are personal decisions, right? Everyone's personal factors are very different. So that factor was enough for me. I was like, these guys are brilliant and they're good people, they're honest people. And if they say they're going to build a $10 billion company doing B2B, I believe them and it's my job to enable them, right? So how do I help them build an organization, build a brand, attract the right talent, attract the right funding, et cetera, et cetera. So, and even until the very end, a lot of the technical discussions that took place on a day-to-day basis would go over my head because it was a very complex and layered business, right? And they'd be talking about data pipelines and using SQL to create a web of this. I was like, I don't, and and I learned a lot. I absorbed a lot. I actually enjoyed the fact that it was a hard left from my previous experience, right? If I had gone to work for an ad tech, I would not have been so far outside of my comfort zone, and perhaps I wouldn't have grown as much, right? So today I could launch my own e-commerce business if I wanted to, and I'm really proud of that fact. So I hope that answers your question, Samreen. Thank you for asking, and thank you to everybody else. Are there any other questions?
Okay, sorry. So I'm just going to throw. So we have do. So would you vouch for a team and people rather than the idea itself?
That's for me. That's for me. That's my personal. That is not a prescription, right? That is not something I can give to you, right? I think that so even if you talk to investors, especially like at the pre-seed stage, When investors are making a bet on companies and writing them checks, it is usually more about the people than it is about anything else, because usually companies don't have much else to show at that stage. So yeah, that's what I took a bet on their ability to execute, their clarity in their problem solving process, the clarity of vision, right? Because I mean, when I was having that back and forth, I met the founder, 5, 6 times before I agreed to meet anybody else. And even when I met everyone else, I had 3 hour long conversations. I poked a million holes in their concept, right? And they had an answer for all of my questions like that, right? And that was what really convinced me that these guys know what they're talking about. And of course, there's a lot of other more technical considerations that even I couldn't come up with. But if they're able to answer my questions with such confidence and ease, then they are probably very serious about this. So that was enough for me. Sorry, you were saying.
Okay, so two questions actually. One is stemming from what you just said, right? So, in terms of what Hafiz Mohammed asked, as for people who are early in their careers, right? What questions should they ask founders? For example, I work in early stage startups, so normally when I interview, when I meet founders or CEOs, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What questions should I ask? In terms of judging where they are. Is this a startup I want to work at? Is this an industry I want to work in? Is this a growth enabled industry?
Yeah, I mean, I generally don't like to ask, sorry, I generally don't like to answer questions that are Googleable. You can Google this and find a list of very well worded and well thought out questions that will make this a lot easier. But generally, it's about asking them why they chose the problem that they're solving. And you can get an idea of founder market fit that way to really see how passionate they are, to really see how well they understand that problem. It is, of course, important to ask about the financial health of the company, right? And that includes everything like from funding to runway to, what's the CAC LTV ratio? What kind of top line are they achieving in terms of revenue? What is the realistic projection of where the company will go in the immediate future, right? What are the further fundraising plans, right? So these are also important financial considerations. And then it's important to ask questions related to culture, right? So what kind of team do you want to build? What kind of culture do you envision? How would you describe your culture? And if any founder gets stuck in any of these questions or like hesitates or stutters or this and that, you can kind of get an idea that they're bullshitting, right? And they don't actually have an answer. So these are basically important, but I would advise everybody, if you're serious about this, then you Google it, you'll find a list of 50 questions. Talking about clarity of vision, is inter-mentorship and constant flow of ideas important? Yeah, I mentioned that earlier, that early stage startups are all about cross-functional collaboration, and that's the only way an early stage company can be built, because most early stage companies are short on cash, so they have to be lean, whether or not they choose to be, whether or not they want to be. And lean companies mean that everyone has to wear multiple hats, and everybody has to contribute in other areas of business. So yes.
Okay, perfect. I If there are any other questions, please feel free to drop in. So in
You
terms
had another
of
one? Yeah,
so I just want to throw in a statement. You tell me how right or wrong I am. Okay.
sure.
So in terms of trading stability, right? Um, so I do know I'm working in for early stage startups, which again might or might not grow, right? That's a different thing, right? What I'm also working in on is a journalist skill set which I have, right? Which again, in the long run would impact me or would not, might not impact, like affect me, right? But that depends on from what I have. So how I kind of manage stability is I throughout my career I have built a network, right? And within that network, with founders and people who are working in startups, I'm generally able to A, get mentorship, B, acquire skills and stuff, right? And C, get connected with startups, early stage startups who need my journalist skill set, right? One kind of so this is how I have managed that stability, right? How right or wrong I am in this approach, right? And what are some other ways people can do to kind of manage instability working in startups?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you asking about like how do you find your own stability,
Yeah.
even if your
So in
company is
yeah. Yeah, so from the question which was asked earlier, right? Even if the
yeah.
startup fails, what do you do? With companies kind of
Yeah, so
hire you, right?
it's exactly what I said, right? I mean, so
Yeah,
if you're not building your own body of work, then that's the only way you fail, right? And you build your own body of work by hitting targets, by finding, new and new things to build, and adding those to your portfolio, right? So at the end of it, even if the company is doing well, you still need that because you
yeah,
eventually want to move on to another startup or another job, right? Are you can't just rely on the fact that, well, I joined this company when it was pre-seed and now it's Series B, so I must be great, right? That's not
yeah,
enough.
yeah,
It's a very, very competitive world. And in that competitive world, you need to be able to pinpoint and build your own narrative that I did A, B, C, and D that helped the company go from pre-seed to Series B. So, so that's how it has to happen. We got a
okay.
question.
Yeah,
Title says
we have
trading
a question.
stability for impact, and you said we're all here for money if I picked it right. Isn't that a paradox? Or by impact you mean money? No, I don't. No, I don't. I mean money. Money is money. Impact is impact. The topic is trading stability for impact in terms of opting for startups over MNCs. And like I said, impact and culture are very important considerations. Maybe you don't even need money, right? And maybe for you it's all about, well, what kind of environment do I get to work in? Where do I learn the most? Then it's still startups. And even if it is about money, I still think it's about startups because you get to play a major role in shaping that company. And usually you will own a small piece of it, right? So you don't ever get to own a piece of a large corporation or an MNC, do you? So that's what I'm saying. You want to trade that stability of a large corporation, opt for a startup job where you're going to be creating a bigger and better impact in society anyway, right? And you also happen to be in a position where you get to potentially have a way bigger payday, right? At the end of it, all you're ever going to earn in that corporate is a salary, right? And in terms of impact, what are you really doing? You're helping them sell more soap, right? Sure, society needs soap, but is that really what you want to be doing? Whereas here, you're helping small retailers earn more and more income, or you're helping a certain segment of society have access to external capital through financing, which wasn't possible before, or you're helping people get a new form of transportation and create jobs for other people who are the ones that are doing the transportation that also wasn't possible before. That is impact on the societal level. And that matters to me a whole lot. I would imagine it matters to a lot of other people as well. But we can't ignore the fact that, you know, that I had equity in my company, and hopefully, inshallah, my company will have an exit and I will have enough money to then build my own next startup if I want to, or buy a house in Spain. I don't know, maybe. I'm already looking at houses in Spain. So, um, any other questions? No? Yes? Okay, then I'm going to go. Sorry, are you saying something? You're on mute. One of the most important
Yeah,
questions, some adults say, "Aap gir ke hi seekhte ho," building ourselves smartly, knowing the expected outcomes of our decisions instead of being partially unaware. I do not understand that question. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. Building ourselves smartly. Da, da, da.
oh,
I mean, you
okay,
can
so
reword that question if Omes wants to reword
I
that question,
yeah,
or you can turn on
uh,
your mic. I don't know why you guys are shy. Like this is not. This is 10 people here. I don't know why y'all are being this formal.
yeah, so Umair, if you please rephrase it, right? That would help. Okay, so what I kind of wanted to ask, most of the thing, I think almost all of it you have answered at this point, right? In terms of discovering yourself, right? In terms of discovering yourself, right? Honestly, I've changed my career path within the last 2 years, like 4 times now, right?
That's
So
fine.
this is
Yeah.
this is how a startup. I've worked in 3 different industries now, right? So you kind of get exposure and kind of understand what to do. So that was one question I had you answered, right? In terms of stability, I'm very familiar with unstable stability and the kind of nervousness that comes with it and
Yeah.
managing it. And my kind of opting way of managing that instability was to build my skill set and my network, right? For you, it might be different. For other people, it might be different. But this is something that I've observed is very important, right? Especially working in startups. Um, Having this is what I kind of asked, right? When you are working in an MNC, your personality and your career is defined by that MNC. However, when you're
Yes.
working in startups, your career and your growth is defined by who you are and what you are and what you do and what can you achieve, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There was I saw this on Facebook, right? And by Dr. Phil, and he said if you have a skill that's worth paying a them, people will hire you always, right? So
Yeah.
these were the internal questions I kind of have. If someone has any other questions, please do ask. I think we do have
Yeah.
some questions
Uh,
in the chat
Our
box.
chance to fall could be decreased if you make our move smartly by studying the metrics so do we become more aware after we face some kind of loss. दूसरों से क्या इस तरह सीख सकते हैं कि हमें कभी बड़ी नाकामयाबी ना मिले. I think you're asking a very bad question. I think you're asking me how to avoid failure, and failure is a part of life. And if you don't fail, you're never going to learn. You have to fail on your own to understand what failure is and what success is. So, there's no way to avoid failure. You can learn from others and avoid like really bad decisions, and why not to take them. Like for example, I'm telling you to opt for startups earlier in your career instead of MNCs or corporates. But that doesn't mean that you're a failure if you go to a corporate, whatever. I mean, but you need to be outside of your comfort zone to grow, and you need to fail to grow, right? Do you guys know Thomas Edison, inventor of the light bulb? Right? He had a very famous quote when someone asked him, how he felt about because he failed. This is a very famous thing that he failed 2,000 times before successfully developing the cotton filament that is used inside of a light bulb. And when someone asked him how he felt about that, he said, "No, I just found 2,000 ways how to not make a light bulb." Right? So you don't actually reach success without failure. It's part of the journey. There's no cheat code to success. Um, right? Or you're just very lucky. You're just very lucky and you're a Mark Zuckerberg and you succeed without even, doing anything else. The first thing you build is just, right out of the park. How can we explore opportunities in international startups? Well, I mean, the cool thing is that founders are generally more approachable than large CEOs of large companies. So find them on LinkedIn, write them a cold note, be very clear about who you are, what value you can add, what problems you can solve for them, and what you've done in the past that demonstrates that. That's it, these three things. Who you are, what value you can add / problem you can solve, and what work you've done. Okay. And usually people will respond. If you know that you want to work in product, find the head of product in that company and message them. Right. Give it a couple of tries. Don't give up. Right. And if that one doesn't work, then always find another one. There's always barrier on working rights. Well, you can work remotely. I don't know if you mean you want to immigrate or you want to work remotely. So if you want to immigrate, then of course you have to find a company who will sponsor you. I don't know how to help you with that.
Yeah, actually, in regards to this question about the barrier on working rights, so let me introduce myself. My name is Omar. I'm working in a startup which is based in Singapore, named as Majitar, and
Yeah.
it's basically employer of record business. Competitions are nearly deal and remote. So I'm also navigating other startups in different countries like Europe. I was fond of one startup named Getter, and the other one was DoorDash, where I got an opportunity for initial interview phases. But the only reason was about the working rights barrier. So it was a remote opportunity. It was not an immigration or something, but still, they were not able to provide, I would say, a working right or a contract because they were saying they
Yeah.
were mostly looking for candidates in that particular country. So how can we avoid that because the landscape in Pakistan is quietly decreasing. As we see number of startups, there are numerous opportunities, but as well as it's normally on a stagnant position. So people are normally seeking like international exposure as well. How can we come up with this? What sort of arrangements we can do?
Yeah, understood. Understood. Again, I don't like to answer questions that are Googleable, but I'll do it anyway. First of all, I disagree with your statement about Pakistan startups only offering stagnant positions. I don't know what that means. I know kids who graduated out of university and joined a company, and in 2 years are heading an entire function in a startup, including mine and others. But the other part of your question is answered by you finding the right job board and applying the right filters in your search. So again, just need to do a little bit more research, and you'll find a startup specific job board called Well Found. That's one word, Well Found. And there you can filter with remote opportunities, and specify remote opportunities that are worldwide, because I know that some remote jobs are limited to that particular locality, right? So a lot of the US startups, for example, can only offer remote jobs within the continental US. But if you go on Well Found, you'll find remote opportunities for people anywhere in the world. And there are, I'm sure, various other job boards as well where you can filter. I believe Indeed allows you to filter remote worldwide as well. So that's the only thing I can say to that, is that there are opportunities available. I know people were sitting here in Karachi working remotely for startups in Berlin, in Dubai, in Riyadh. So you can as well. It's a matter of it's a lot more difficult to find. I understand that. On what terms should you negotiate stock options? Well, each company has its own formula for how they do this. So I can't give you a formula for how to negotiate. The way it will usually work is you're offered some cash compensation along with some stock options. And you can do plus minus on both sides. So you can say, well, I want more stock options and I'm willing to take less cash, which is usually, most startups are very happy to hear this, because they want to keep their cash burn to a minimum, right? So if you want to reduce your cash, that works out for everybody. And others will say, like this has happened to me in Dastgyr as well. People will say, I don't believe in stock options at all, and you can get rid of all of that and just give me, even 20,000 rupees extra in cash. And so that works as well. So really, that's the way to do it. Generally, it also depends on what stage the company is at and what kind of business they're building. So if it's very, very, very early stage, then it should be, something that is only one decimal point, right? So 0.1%, 0.5%, right? It should not be anything lower than that, right? And typically it'll be higher if you are a more senior executive. So a CTO, for example, at a very early stage company will easily come in and take 1-2%, right? But for a younger professional like you, it should be, just below one, and no lower than that, right? If it is a company that already has a slightly bigger team and maybe has already raised round funding, already has some traction, then that number may become a little lower than one decimal point further. But let me tell you how. Hold on, I have this math here somewhere. I can find it for you. By the way, if anybody else has any questions, let me know. Yeah, so typically senior folks get as high as up to 1.5%, which is what I said, in early stages, right? Post Series A, typical ratio is 1-4. For every 1 rupee of cash salary, 4 rupees worth of stock are issued. And you can figure out what that calculation is, because some companies will offer stock options in terms of a percentage, and some will just tell you the dollar value, right? That we're giving you, let's say, $10,000 stock options. So then you have to ask that question, well, what is the share price today, and what is the valuation today, so I can also figure out the percentage of my ownership. And it's completely fair to ask those questions. Why do you think startup, which started in couple of years in Pakistan, are closing at fast rate? Because the funding environment has dried up. That's why. I don't know what else to say. Most startups were very early stage and they didn't raise money to last 5 years. So funding environment has dried up, along with a very, very, very bad economic climate in Pakistan, especially, right? Inflation is extremely high. I don't know if you've noticed. Currency is extremely devalued. Don't know if you've noticed. So that creates a horrible environment for business. And that, along with the global trend of venture capital slowing down has obviously made it impossible for companies to survive. The only ones that are surviving are the ones that had large parcels of cash in their bank accounts.
True. The unfortunate but very true. So we are at the end. So we again
Well, 6.
yeah. So if there is one, so we have time for one more question. If there's one more short question, we can do. Otherwise,
Yeah, I see a couple of startups. I think SalaPay is doing really well.
yeah.
I think they have great traction. I think that they're still doing well in terms of finances. They've got a decent amount of runway ahead of them. I think that Abhi is doing really well. It's probably the only proper payments ecosystem, right? With invoice factoring and earned wage access and COD financing. They're really leveraging the NBFC license in all the ways possible. And I love seeing that. Who else? I'm sure there are others. I can't think of anyone else, but these two I really like.
Okay, perfect. With that, we come to our close of the session. Thank you, Mr. Saif, for joining us today. It was very insightful. I hope everyone here have had another insightful session, right? Again, very thankful to you for joining us here, right? We hope you have a nice weekend. And perfect, right?
Thank you,
And
sir. Thank you for
yeah,
having me.
perfect. And we hope we arrange another session with you as well. This has been very fun for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. For sure. Y'all have a good weekend, guys. Bye-bye.